They didn't expect resistance. That was their first mistake. The Jareth Collective had cataloged over 6,000 sentient species across 4 galactic arms. Some were hostile, some were primitives, some had their moments of brilliance, but all were predictable. The Collective thrived on understanding, classification, and domination through logic. Their superiority didn't come from weapons alone. It came from knowing their enemies before their enemies knew themselves. So when their probes picked up signs of an unregistered human colony on the dead edge of Sector 91 Beta, their curiosity was mild at best. Earth had fallen silent decades ago. Humanity, scattered and leaderless, was believed extinct or assimilated. Whatever this colony was, it would be manageable. A simple sweep-and-study mission. They sent a research vessel, modest in arms, heavy on sensors. 5 analysts, 3 biological specialists, 1 warframe drone unit. The ship's commander, Therix Vel, wasn't worried. No fleet needed. No backup called. After all, it was just humans. The first signal they intercepted should have raised alarms. It was audio, distorted by time and static, but unmistakably human in cadence. The language was old Terran English, gruff and broken, overlaid with something newer. A mix of dialects, maybe, or maybe something else. Hold the line. If they step into the iron, we bury them in it. Vel dismissed it as leftover data from long-past civil transmissions, until they landed. The planet was wrong. Too quiet. No wildlife, no ambient noise, just silence. The kind that grates on instinct and memory, like a predator is holding its breath. The land looked lifeless, but beneath the surface, metal shimmered. Their sensors picked up unusual patterns, not natural structures, but something artificial, old, repurposed, human but altered, warped. The colony was built underground, fortified with layers of unknown alloys, half of which didn't match anything the Jareth database had on human engineering. The structures were brutal in design, thick steel, sharp angles, and no ornamentation. Functional, defensive, almost tribal. They entered the outer sector through a blast tunnel. No welcome, no broadcast. Just cold steel and walls scorched from some long-forgotten fire. Then they found the first one. A man, if you could still call him that. Tall, bare-chested, eyes like burned coal, skin weathered and etched with markings, ritualistic, intentional. His left arm was missing, replaced by some kind of self-welded mechanical limb. He didn't flinch, he didn't run. He just stood there, staring, as if the arrival of an alien vessel meant nothing to him. As if he'd seen worse. Vel approached, using the standard first contact protocol. The man didn't speak. He spat. It wasn't until the drone scanned him that they realized he was broadcasting. Not with words, but with heat signatures, muscle tension, micro-expressions. Threat detection. The human had memorized their scanner patterns and was feeding false data. The Jareth were being studied back, watched. Vel gave the order to deploy recon units deeper into the colony. That was mistake number 2. Within 2 hours, they lost contact with all 7 recon bots. Silent blackouts, no alarms, no damage reports, just gone. Then came the symbols. Carved into walls, burned into bulkheads, not random, not decoration. Warnings. You came to dissect. We came to evolve. No gods, no masters, only steel and bone. One of the analysts panicked and tried to beam data back to the mothership. The signal never left the colony. A human boy, barely 16 by their estimates, walked into the room, placed a homemade EMP charge onto the relay, and smiled before it blew. He said nothing. but he looked at them with something that struck harder than any weapon. Pity. That's when Vel knew something was deeply wrong. These weren't survivors. These weren't refugees. This colony wasn't begging for rescue. It wasn't praying for reconnection to Earth. It had grown roots, built gods from metal, turned war into culture, raised children on fear, fury, and tactics. And now that they'd been found, they were hunting. The briefing room aboard the Jareth reconnaissance vessel was silent, save for the flickering of the holofeed replaying the footage. The human boy walking into the relay chamber, dropping a homemade EMP, and casually watching the chaos unfold. He didn't flinch at the flash or sound. He didn't scream. Just watched. Commander Therix Vel turned off the feed with a sharp gesture. "This isn't a colony. It's a goddamn trap." The analysts sat frozen. Their education didn't prepare them for this. Humans were supposed to be erratic, emotional, clever in pockets, but inferior overall. What they'd encountered was none of those things. There was a stillness to these colonists, a kind of discipline that wasn't military, but something colder, more instinctual. "These humans," one analyst began, voice shaking. "They didn't just survive, they adapted," Vel snapped. "Quieter than any predator we've cataloged, smarter than they have any right to be." The biospecialist adjusted his visors. "They modified themselves. That man we found, his prosthetic was fused with neural tissue, but there were no signs of rejection. Self-engineered cybernetic integration. That's hundreds of years ahead of where they should be." Vel didn't respond immediately. His gaze locked on the colony map, what little they had of it. Less than 10% scanned. The rest scrambled by signal jamming and environmental manipulation, which meant one thing. They were letting them see only what they wanted seen. "Surface protocols, now!" Vel barked. The ship's AI, a cold, semi-sentient node named K-17, brought up colony blueprints they'd reconstructed. Overlapping corridors, dead-end trap points, airlocks that didn't lead outside but into rooms with no exits. The entire design screamed deliberate confusion. "They've built a psychological maze," one tech whispered, "like they knew someone would come, like they prepared for us." "They weren't preparing for us," Vel said grimly. "They were preparing for anyone." Down below, in the labyrinth that was once a human hope for survival, the children were being trained in silence. A man named Garen stood barefoot in the center of a pressure chamber. His body bore scars across the chest, lines so deep they looked like words written in flesh. His voice was gravel, his hands like stone. "What's the rule?" he asked the 5 boys kneeling in front of him. The eldest, maybe 10 or 11, answered without hesitation. "What bleeds can be broken." "And what if it doesn't bleed?" "Then we make it wish it could." Garen nodded. "Good." Again. The drills weren't just physical. They were mental. These kids were taught to disassemble weapons blindfolded, to hack basic foreign code by ear, to recognize alien ships by the sound their hulls made during atmospheric descent. They didn't fear the Jareth. They didn't even hate them. Hatred was a waste of energy. They studied them. And now that the Jareth had come, there was only one logical path left. War. Back on the ship, Vel decided to send a 3-man team to investigate further. Armed this time. Not recon bots, not sensors, flesh and armor. Lieutenant Moran led the squad, older, hardened, and not as naive as the researchers. His team carried kinetic rail rifles and wore environmental suits adapted for biohazard zones. "Do not engage unless you have to," Vel ordered. "Get in. Get visuals. Confirm colony scale. Extract. If it moves, watch. If it watches you, retreat. No assumptions." Moran nodded once. He didn't like this job. The silence. The boy's face, the way the humans didn't try to speak, plead, or defend. Predators don't explain themselves. They wait for you to step into their mouth. The squad dropped into the same tunnel where the first contact happened. But this time, there was no human waiting. Only a symbol, freshly carved into the bulkhead, deep and messy. A human skull with lines radiating outward like sunbeams. A warning. They moved forward in formation. The halls were tighter now, claustrophobic. Steam hissed from vents. The walls dripped condensation laced with metal, copper, iron, possibly blood. The deeper they went, the more the colony changed. It stopped looking like a survival shelter. It started looking like a testing ground. Cages. Not for animals. For people. Some of them were still occupied. But the occupants weren't normal. One man was fused to a wall, metal tubes running through his veins, eyes replaced with cameras. He twitched, hummed, repeated one word. Resist, resist, resist. Over and over like a corrupted data loop. They didn't touch him. A little farther in, they found another room. This one filled with bones. Not just human. Alien, too. Old. Picked clean. Sorted by size and shape. Trophies. Then the ambush hit. Not from the shadows. Not a sneak attack. A door slammed behind them, locking with a magnetic seal. The walls pulsed. Lights shifted to red. A voice echoed through the room. Male, calm, human. You brought weapons, smart, but you brought your fear with you. That's the real mistake. Maran barked, "Identify yourself!" But there was no reply. Only a grinding sound. From the far end, a panel opened, and a figure stepped out. Another human, but different. Taller, shoulders broad. His face was painted black with soot, eyes glowing faintly from cybernetic enhancement. He carried no weapon. He didn't need one. "Who are you?" Maran shouted. The man answered simply, "We are the ones Earth left behind." Before they could react, gas hissed from the ceiling. Not poison, but a stimulant. Hallucinogenic, designed to confuse the alien suits, fry the filters, scramble input. The Jareth tech was too advanced, predictable in its complexity. Maran and his men began to cough, shields flaring red. The human advanced slowly, not rushing, no fear, no mercy. He was smiling. Hours later, only Maran returned. Alone. He stumbled back through the entrance tunnel, armor scorched, helmet in his hands. His face was pale, his left eye missing. "What the hell happened down there?" Vel asked. Maran sat on the deck, trembling. "They weren't attacking us. They were training with us." "What do you mean?" "They let us in. Let us engage. Measured response time, accuracy, adaptability. We were a simulation run. A fucking field exam." Vel's blood ran cold. "They're not just survivors," Marin whispered. "They're building something, preparing. They don't want to return to Earth. They want to come for it." The room went dead silent. Then the ship's internal alarms flared red. Intrusion. The colony hadn't just let them in. It had infiltrated them. From the vent shafts, 2 human children, no older than 12, emerged. One held a pulse disruptor built from scavenged tech. The other wielded a blade shaped from a starship fin. They didn't say a word. They just attacked. Security bots reacted late. By the time they neutralized the threat, one Jareth officer lay dead, his throat cut open with frightening precision. Another was poisoned by a scratch. The children were killed, but not before leaving one last message etched into the wall behind them. Observation ends. Trial begins. Vel stood in the command center hours later, staring out into the planet's atmosphere. His face was blank, but inside his mind, calculations raced. These humans weren't just unpredictable, they were beyond understanding. Their children killed without hesitation. Their elders welcomed violence like it was ritual. Their technology was scavenged, ugly, but terrifyingly effective. And worst of all, they were not afraid of death. They'd been cut off from Earth for decades, maybe centuries. And what had they done in that time? Turned pain into purpose, loss into law, isolation into identity. They had no gods, no leaders, only the memory of betrayal and the fury it left behind. Vel activated the emergency beacon. "This is Commander Vel of the Jareth Collective. I'm issuing a Class 5 escalation. This colony is not salvageable. Immediate purge recommended." But even as he said the words, a small voice in his head whispered the truth. "You're not purging them. They're testing you, and you just failed." Commander Vel had seen many forms of sentient life over his career. Civilizations that fell into chaos after a single battle. Species that evolved too quickly, burned themselves out. Some who preferred death over resistance. All of them had patterns. Predictability. But these humans, these forgotten children of Earth, had no pattern. No rhythm, no surrender. They defied classification, and that terrified him more than anything. The bodies of the two human children who had infiltrated the ship lay in containment units. One had a broken leg, bone fused with steel rods and plastic joints. The other had a heart enlarged by genetic engineering, twice the usual human mass, making him faster, stronger. Even in death, his body looked ready to leap. The Jareth medic bot had scanned both bodies 3 times. "These children are not children," it finally reported. "Chronologically underdeveloped, but physiologically built for combat. Bone density enhanced, pain tolerance, unnatural, memory glands stimulated. They were bred and trained for tactical assault." Vel clenched his jaw. "How long have they been doing this?" The analyst whispered, "Long enough to become something else." Down below, Garen stood over a mass grave. His people didn't bury their dead in silence. They stood. They watched. They remembered. The children who had been sent to the ship were not mourned like martyrs. They were celebrated like warriors. 2 brothers lit the fire pit. Smoke filled the underground cavern as chants echoed low and steady. Not religious, not tribal, more ancestral, each word grounded in pain and fire. Garen placed a shard of bone into his mouth and chewed slowly. It was ritual, a reminder. "We don't pray," he said to the circle of men standing around him. "We remember what they did to us, what Earth forgot, what the stars ignored." A younger man, barely 20, asked, "Do we strike now?" Garen's gaze hardened. "Not yet. We let them believe they can run." He turned toward the wall, a map of space, crudely etched into steel. He touched the location of Earth. "They abandoned us. Now we return evolved." On the Jareth vessel, Vel's recommendation for planetary purge was rejected. The collective didn't act quickly on extermination protocols, especially not against a species they had once catalogued as nearly extinct. Bureaucracy and arrogance had always slowed them, and this time it would cost them dearly. Instead, they ordered containment, observation. Vel cursed under his breath. He knew what this meant. They were going to get more of his people killed. He called in Moran. "You still want payback?" Vel asked. Moran's eye patch was new. He hadn't spoken much since the ambush. But at those words, his silence broke. "They killed my squad like it was a game." "Then it's time we flipped the board." Vel ordered a strike team. 12 soldiers, fully armed, armor reinforced, drones flying in formation. Maran would lead them. Their mission was no longer recon. It was disruption. "Make noise," Vel said. "Burn their corridors. Force them out." "What if they don't come?" Vel paused. "They will." They entered through the upper hatch, different from the tunnel they'd used before. The colony's design had no uniformity. Each sector seemed like it had been built independently by different minds at different times. And yet, it worked. There were no wasted paths, no unnecessary doors. Every inch had a purpose. The strike team swept through one corridor after another, encountering abandoned classrooms, crude forges, and deep meditative chambers filled with thick smoke and strange chants. But no people. The colony was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Until the drone feed cut out. All of them, simultaneously. Maran didn't wait. "Stack left. Guns up." Then the floor beneath them moved. It wasn't a trap door. It wasn't an ambush. The ground itself shuddered, as if alive, and split apart. Two of the soldiers fell screaming into the void. One of them hit the side and bounced back up, bleeding, legs shattered. The other was simply gone. The walls rippled. Organic metal, alive or close enough to it. That's when they saw them. The Ascendants, not regular humans, not Garen's type. These were larger, armored biologically. Their eyes glowed with tech-fused retinas. Their skin had hardened, almost plated. The transformation wasn't aesthetic. It was purposeful, functional. These were the humans who had survived inside the lab sectors, where experiments never stopped. Without speaking, they attacked. Not like mindless beasts, like coordinated warriors. 3 soldiers were torn apart in seconds. One had his gun shoved through his own mouth by a grinning Ascendant who used his own armor plating as leverage. Maran fired wildly, hitting one center mass. The thing stumbled, but didn't fall. It just looked down, touched the wound, then smiled, like it enjoyed the sensation. Maran shouted into his comm, "Evac, fall back. They're not just human anymore." Vel watched the live feed from the ship. His jaw clenched as screams echoed through the speakers. He issued the retreat order. Only 4 came back. Maran was among them, dragging one soldier whose leg had been severed. Blood soaked the ship's deck. The other 2 were in shock. Maran dropped to one knee and looked up at Vel. "You're not dealing with colonists anymore. You're dealing with a hive, but not like insects, not like drones, more like wolves." Vel's voice was hollow. "Hive implies a queen." Maran smiled grimly. "They don't have a queen. They have a belief." Back on the colony, Garen stood before a steel altar. Beside him stood the Ascendant who had survived Maran's shot. He was young, barely 25, but his body was warped by upgrades. Cybernetics merged with flesh. His voice was deep, slow, calculated. "They fight with fear," he said. "They haven't evolved beyond instinct." Garen looked toward the ceiling, where crude paintings of old Earth still existed. Fires, ruins, families abandoned. "They never will," Garen replied. "That's why they must fall. Not just the Jareth." He touched Earth's symbol again. "But the others, too." Vel stood at the window again, staring down at the planet. He had already broken one major protocol, by sending a kill team. The next decision would seal his fate. "Prep the orbital cannon," he said to K-17. The AI hesitated. "That will violate 4 intergalactic codes of engagement." "I'm well aware." He turned to Marin. "We vaporize the main core. End it." But just as the cannon locked target, the ship jolted violently. Incoming fire. From the planet. A javelin of steel pierced the lower deck. Homemade, launched from the colony using atmospheric boosters and unknown propulsion. 1/3 of the ship lost power. Fire alarms screamed. K-17's voice cracked. "They've breached our atmosphere with primitive weapons, with accuracy." Vel whispered, "No, not primitive." He opened the satellite cam and froze. On the surface of the colony, the humans had drawn something massive, etched into the sand, huge enough to be seen from orbit. A Jareth war symbol, inverted, and below it in crude English. "Now we test you." The planet was no longer a mystery. It was a declaration. This wasn't a colony trying to survive. It was a training ground. A breeding pit for a new kind of humanity. A humanity that didn't want to return to Earth as lost children, but as conquerors. And the Jareth? They were the first trial. Smoke crawled through the upper decks of the Jareth vessel like a living thing. The hull groaned as atmospheric pressure tried to stabilize after the surface strike. Emergency lights painted everything in a sick red glow. K-17, the AI, had rerouted power from non-essential systems, but the breach had crippled the ship's lower thruster cores. Commander Vel stood in silence, eyes fixed on the external monitor. The colony was still there. Untouched. Thriving. Every sensor pointed downwards told the same story. The colony had increased its energy output, weaponized heat signatures, and began emitting jamming fields from dozens of small mobile relays. It wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was going dark for war. "They built that projectile with scavenged tech," one of the bridge crew whispered. "How did they get the aim right?" Vel didn't answer. He was thinking of the crude symbol etched into the surface below. The Jareth war crest flipped upside down, a direct insult, a challenge, but not childish. This wasn't emotion. This was strategy. And now, the commander realized the humans weren't just responding. They were 5 steps ahead. Below, in the lower tunnels of the colony, a different kind of war council was taking place. Garen stood with 5 others. Not officers, not elected leaders. Just survivors. Each one with a scar that could have ended a weaker man. They called themselves the Core. They weren't in charge because of power. They were in charge because they'd lived through things most men would beg to forget. "The ship is damaged," said the youngest, Malric, his voice sharp like glass. "1 engine offline, their AIs running on minimal cores." Garen stared at the map drawn across the wall. Hand-sketched, always updated. Each dot showed where sensor bait had been placed. Every quadrant lit up based on Jareth movement. They weren't just monitoring the ship. They were tracking behavior. Another elder, Garrick, spoke. "We could hit them again. Send another strike through their wounded flank. Take the rest of the propulsion offline." "No," Garen said, eyes narrowing. "Let them feel cornered. Let them bleed first." He looked at the boy beside him, a lean, silent figure no older than 15, carrying a pack full of explosives and tools. "Take 4. Go into the upper shaft. Not to kill. Just watch. Learn how they die." The boy nodded and vanished into the shadows. On the Jareth ship, Maran was in the med bay. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours. The painkillers didn't touch his thoughts. What haunted him wasn't the death of his squad. It was how surgical it had been. The colonists didn't waste movement. They didn't fight with emotion. They calculated fear, weaponized silence, and hunted in pairs like seasoned tacticians. "They aren't human anymore," he muttered to no one in particular. One of the injured soldiers across from him looked up. Then what are they? Moran answered without looking. Something better. Vel entered the room, scanning the remaining wounded. We've lost 9, including 2 who self-terminated rather than risk capture. Moran didn't flinch. Can't blame them. This place doesn't show mercy. Vel leaned closer. We need a route inside, a weakness, something. Moran finally looked him in the eyes. You're not going to find it from above. You're going to have to bleed for it. Vel paused. You volunteering? Moran smiled grimly. Already packed. Hours later, a pod dropped into the canyon outside the colony. Disguised under atmospheric debris, it wasn't picked up by surface sensors, except the humans weren't standard sensors. They were children. Spotters, runners, young as 10, embedded along the cliffs with handmade lenses and triangulation tools. They saw the pod, let it land, then reported it through shortwave pulses and heat-coded signals. Moran didn't know he was already marked. He moved fast, low to the ground, avoiding the old paths. His route was clean, chosen with years of infiltration training. He found an entrance not yet bombed, one the maps hadn't shown. It led into a chamber, dark, wet, filled with strange whispers, not electronic, human. Dozens of voices speaking low in overlapping tones. Prayers, no data, recited like mantras, missile codes, enemy ship models, anatomical breakdowns of Jareth soldiers. He crept forward, stepping between shadow and steel until he reached a grated catwalk. Below him were rows of boys, young, focused, repeating everything they had ever learned from captured enemy signals. They weren't playing war. They were being molded by it. He stared, frozen. Not by fear, but awe. A culture raised with no comfort, no distraction, no rest from the cold truth. The galaxy had forgotten them. So they would never forget what it meant to be prey. One of the boys looked up suddenly, eyes locking with Marin's. He didn't speak. He simply pointed, and within seconds the alarm blared. Marin ran, not because he was scared, but because he knew what was coming. The Ascendants. Back on the ship, Vel watched the alarm feed flare red. Intruder detected. Quadrant Delta 5. His stomach twisted. Moran. The ship's scanners tried to follow, but jamming flooded the system. Only fragments of the signal got through. Blurry, distorted, screams, footsteps. A voice, Marin's, shouting through static. They've built a goddamn army down here. Then silence. Connection cut. The next time they saw Marin, it was on a public broadcast. The colonists hacked the ship's primary monitor and streamed it. Moran sat in a chair, tied, bruised, bloody, but not broken. Beside him stood Garen. Vel stood from his command seat. Mute it! Cut the feed! No, one of the techs whispered. He's transmitting it back willingly. The room went cold. Garen spoke calmly into the lens. This is not a declaration of peace. This is not a negotiation. He placed a hand on Marin's shoulder. This man came alone. He came not with fear, but with purpose, so we gave him something in return. He stepped back. Moran lifted his head. He stared into the camera. They're ready, Vel. They're more than soldiers. They're believers. We trained machines to follow orders. These people trained children to lead wars. A pause. Get off this planet, before they let more of us live. Vel didn't sleep that night. He watched the stars outside his shattered window, wondering how long the collective would take to respond. But he already knew the truth. They wouldn't. The Jareth didn't believe in escalation until bureaucracy cleared it. And by the time they approved retaliation, this war would be lost. Inside the colony, the core gathered again. The Ascendants stood guard, silent and still. Malric whispered, "He'll warn them. They'll bring more." Garen nodded. Good. He looked down at a crate, opened it. Inside were parts, Jareth tech, scavenged from wreckage, re-engineered. We're going to build something they can't understand, not just machines. He looked around the chamber. We're going to send a message to the galaxy. He grabbed a sharp tool, carved one word into the steel beside him. Remembered. They always thought humanity needed saving. That was the myth the galaxy told itself. That Earth's colonies, those left behind in the Great Expansion, were broken, scattered, clinging to old gods and outdated dreams. The Jareth Collective didn't fear humans. They pitied them. Until now. Until this colony, this forgotten ember at the edge of Sector 91 Beta, relit the fire in the most primal way possible. Not with diplomacy, not with surrender, with blood. Commander Vel sat alone in the ship's observation chamber. The silence was too heavy. His ship, once an immaculate symbol of control, now smelled like rust, antiseptic, and dread. The playback from Moran's transmission looped in the corner of the screen. They trained children to lead wars. That sentence haunted him more than the footage itself. Not because of the savagery, but because of the precision. These weren't aimless raiders or tribal primitives. They were intentionally bred tacticians, raised on betrayal, taught to believe everyone in the sky was an enemy, because to them, everyone had been. A chime echoed in the chamber. K-17's cold voice followed. Commander, external anomaly detected. Vel stood quickly. Explain. Unidentified object launched from planetary surface. Trajectory, vertical. Velocity, suborbital. Weapon? Unknown. Down on the planet, Garen stood atop the launch tower. The structure pieced together from ruined escape pods, mining elevators, and one recovered Jareth booster core. The object wasn't a weapon. It was a coffin. Inside was the body of one of their own, an ascendant who died during a tunnel collapse last cycle. Fused into the casing were hundreds of bone fragments, torn Jareth armor pieces, and a series of scrawled words etched into the hull in 36 languages. We did not die in silence. We were not lost. We were left. Then the coffin burst into flame as it entered orbit, a streak of fire across the sky. But it didn't burn out. The outer casing peeled back, revealing a relay transmitter. It pulsed once, then sent out a signal across every known Jareth frequency. We are coming back. One colony at a time. Panic wasn't something the Jareth understood easily, but it spread through Vel's ship like poison. The idea that a human signal, unauthorized, unregistered, defiant, had breached military protocol and interrupted Jareth command flow, that was unthinkable. Analysts scrambled. Officers argued. K-17 began cutting access to non-essential communication to prevent panic from reaching the next fleet node. Vel watched the flame trail disappear into the stars. He didn't speak for nearly 2 minutes. Then, recall all exterior units. Full internal lockdown. Prepare to leave orbit. A junior officer balked. Leave? Sir, the collective won't approve withdrawal. Vel turned slowly, eyes dark. They can come down here and finish the job themselves, then. But the humans weren't done. That coffin in orbit? It wasn't just a message. It was a diversion. In the ship's cargo hold, near the rear power stabilizers, something clicked, then hissed, then blinked. A small device, nothing more than scrap metal and raw wire, activated. Its signal was weak, primitive, analog, which is why it bypassed the Jareth's high-level firewall protections entirely. The device pulsed 3 times, then released a burst of molecular destabilizers, not strong enough to destroy the ship, just enough to make the floor disappear. A 10-meter section of hull collapsed into itself, opening the way for a boarding pod. buried inside the ship since the last surface encounter, hidden in the wreckage of the prior strike. Now, it unfolded, and from it came 6 colonists, no ascendants this time, just humans. Old, young, calm, efficient. The crew didn't stand a chance. The colonists didn't fire immediately. They disarmed, not killed, moved like ghost units. One Jareth technician found himself locked in a compartment before he even saw the intruders. Within 5 minutes, the colonists had taken control of the ship's power relays. By 10, they'd shut down the forward nav systems. By 12, they were in the bridge. Vel raised his sidearm when the doors opened, but no one fired. Garen stepped through, dressed in crude body armor marked with hand-etched scars and painted memories, names of the dead, places burned, dates forgotten by everyone but his people. "You can shoot," Garen said, "but then your crew dies. I've mapped this ship. You pull that trigger, and I blow coolant valves in 6 decks." Vel's hand trembled. Garen stepped forward and placed the gun barrel against his own forehead. "You know what makes us different, Commander?" Vel said nothing. Garen's voice dropped to a whisper. "We don't care about dying. We care about being remembered." Then, with a single motion, he pulled the gun from Vel's loose grip. No resistance, just shock. Because for the first time, Vel realized he was no longer the apex species in the room. In the observation deck, the human team released the surviving Jareth officers. Didn't torture them. Didn't even speak. Just left behind a single message scrawled across the glass, reversed so it could be read from the outside. "This was mercy. We only take the ones worth learning from." Then they vanished. By the time Jareth reinforcements arrived 6 hours later, the ship had been gutted of weapons, data cores, and classified schematics. And the humans? Gone. Back into the tunnels of the colony, back into myth. News traveled fast. Despite Jareth efforts to suppress it, the footage leaked. Moran's transmission, the orbital coffin, the boarding footage. Clipped, grainy, but real. And worst of all, the words. We were not lost. We were left. It echoed through military circles, whispered through independent stations, analyzed by sociologists who had once dismissed these colonists as savage relics of a failed expansion. Now, they were becoming a doctrine. Inside the colony, Garen stood before a wall of names. New ones added daily, not of the dead, of the converted, aliens, dissenters, forgotten soldiers who had seen the message and believed in it. The colony was no longer isolated. It was growing, not through conquest, through contagion, through ideology. Vel, now removed from command, stood trial in front of a Jareth military tribunal. The charges were stacked high: negligence, unauthorized engagement, exposure of military weakness. But all Vel could do was stare at the final image they showed him, captured by an automated satellite days after the event. A new structure had risen in the colony. Not a weapon. A statue. 2 children standing side by side, one holding a hammer, the other holding a piece of Jareth armor like a broken toy. Below it, written in twisted, jagged English, "You feared our weakness, but we weaponized it." Vel didn't speak during sentencing. There was nothing left to say. He already knew. They hadn't lost a colony. They'd created a war that couldn't be stopped. The transmission was less than 20 seconds long. Static. Then a single phrase. "We are not the last. We are just the first." It wasn't sent from the human colony. It came from 3 systems away. Sector 89, Gamma, Deep Space Mining Region, Jareth controlled, locked down for nearly 50 years, with a fully integrated garrison and no reported human population. Until now, the satellite that caught the signal was destroyed seconds after the message sent. No survivors, no wreckage left, just silence and fear, Because if there were more human colonies out there, others that had survived, the galaxy's map was wrong. The Jareth database was wrong. Everything they thought they understood was wrong. High Inquisitor Raltek of the Jareth Central Tribunal slammed a clawed hand onto the table. This was supposed to be a footnote in history, a dead colony, an inconvenience. The gathered strategists said nothing. No one interrupted Raltek when he was in this state. He pointed to the floating holo map. Each red dot was a known instance of contact with human resistance since the coffin signal went live. 12. 12 in 4 cycles. And these weren't random attacks. Each one was coordinated, intentional, like someone was activating them. One of the generals finally spoke, voice brittle. "We believe the colony isn't alone. They're networking now, other survivors or believers." "Believers?" Raltek hissed. "Are you suggesting they're building a religion?" "No, sir," the general said slowly. "They're building a memory." Inside the colony, Garen walked through the foundry hall. It was hot, filled with smoke and sweat and the hammering of metal. Children as young as 10 learned to shape weapons from the bones of fallen ships. Every swing was deliberate, every piece of armor, every plate, every bolt, crafted not by machines but by hands. Not because they lacked technology, because this was ritual. Garen stopped beside Malric, who had grown noticeably broader since the early raids. His face was older now. His hands no longer trembled when holding a weapon. "They've started responding," Garen said. Malric nodded, wiping grease from his face. "The others?" "Awakened. 4 confirmed. 3 more likely." "And the ship?" "Still functional. We took more than just fuel." Malric's eyes darkened. "We fly soon." "Yes," Garen said, "but not alone." Elsewhere, on a research moon in Jareth space, an alien scientist named Draskel watched the coffin footage again. Something in it haunted him. Not the message, the silence. No screaming, no begging, no last words. Whoever that man was, sealed into that orbital coffin, he chose to die like that. Voluntarily. No weapon, no bargain. Draskel had studied many species. Martyrs were common. But this was different. This was calculated martyrdom, willing self-erasure for maximum psychological impact. And it worked. Because every time that footage played, every time someone heard, "We were not lost, we were left," something broke inside them. Not sympathy. Guilt, the kind that spreads, the kind that recruits. In a cargo hauler halfway across the galaxy, a Jareth technician named Loro 10 sat in silence, watching the smuggled broadcast again. She wasn't military. She had never even seen a human before. But when she looked into the face of the boy holding a cracked Jareth helmet and smiling like he'd just caught a god with its pants down, she felt something. Shame. The collective had told her that humans were done. But they weren't. They'd just become something else. In a dark hallway inside the colony, Marin stood with Garen. He had remained after the boarding raid, not as a hostage, not even as a guest. He had asked to stay. "You're the enemy," Garen had said. "No," Moran had replied. "I'm proof the enemy breaks." Now he wore rough, forged armor. Still had the patch over his left eye. But he no longer carried a Jareth weapon. He carried a blade forged from the ship he once served on. Garen studied him. "You've trained soldiers. You've seen empires." Maran nodded. "Then you know what comes next." "Yes," Maran said. "They'll purge. And they'll fail." Garen didn't smile, but he placed a hand on Marin's shoulder. "Then we teach them why." The Jareth mobilized everything. By order of Raltek, 3 full war fleets were deployed. No more observation. No more analysis. The time for understanding was over. The humans would be erased. Their colony turned to glass, their memory sealed in redacted files. The first fleet arrived in less than one standard cycle. They came armed with orbital devastators, gravity missiles, and swarm drones. They didn't land. They fired from orbit. The colony didn't move. No shields activated. No fighters launched. The Jareth expected to watch the entire mountain range explode into dust. But what they got was silence. Then the fleet's long-range sensors cut out. Then the missiles vanished from tracking. Then the dreadnought at the center of the fleet imploded. No warning, no contact, just gone. Inside the hull breach, a signal was left, burned into the steel by hand. We learned from your weapons. Now they fear us too. 1 week later, the collective received a message they could not suppress. A war cruiser, Jareth class, broadcasting live footage. The crew bound and left alive. And in the command seat, a child, maybe 11. Calm, scarred, smiling. He looked into the camera. This ship is now remembered. Then the signal cut. The rebellion wasn't organized. It didn't need to be. All it took was one truth. They had survived. All it took was one message. They were never saved, never rescued, never even mourned. They had to become what the galaxy couldn't imagine. They had to become what the galaxy feared. Now that fear was spreading. And Garen? He watched it all in silence, because he knew what was next. Earth, not for revenge, not for forgiveness, but because Earth had forgotten. And it was time it remembered. The signal reached Earth 6 cycles after it first burned through Jareth space. By then the colonies had fallen quiet. Not from peace, from watching, from waiting. The galaxy was holding its breath. When the first decrypted pulse finally broke through the Sol defense grid, it was dismissed as rogue noise. Old colonial chatter. Glitched. Too guttural. Too raw. Not worthy of response. But then the words came through. Not shouted. Not even angry. Just spoken. Calm. Male. This is Colony Echelon 9. Last contact, 78 years ago. Last supply drop, 74 years ago. Last request for help, unanswered. We have not died. We have become. Now, you remember. The message repeated 5 times before disappearing. Earth's reaction was immediate. In the Central Council chambers, politicians, military generals, and private corporate leaders stared in stunned silence at the playback. The screen showed no faces, no weapons, no threat, just the outline of a child's hand, marked in soot and blood, pressed against a steel wall. Below it, the words, "You left us." We learned to leave back. A female council member whispered, "This can't be real. These colonies were declared dead. We had no logs of survivors." One of the generals shook his head. "That's the problem. We never checked." An advisor to the Terran president stood. "This isn't a call for aid. This is a call for reconciliation." "No," said a voice from the back. It was Admiral Ryan, retired, scarred. One of the last living officers who had commanded during the expansion collapse. He stepped forward slowly. "This is a warning." Meanwhile, on the colony, Maran walked through the echo fields, where carved stones bore the names of every child raised underground, some dead, some ascendant, all remembered. Garen stood nearby, sharpening a blade made from fused alien alloy and human carbon steel. "They heard it," Garen said. "Earth finally heard us." Maran nodded. "How do you want them to respond?" "I don't care what they say. I care what they do." He looked towards the tunnel where fresh recruits, Jareth defectors, alien smugglers, old Terran Marines gone rogue, were training beside humans like brothers. Let them come. Let them see us. Then we'll see who they cry for. The Jareth collective was unraveling. Since the failed purge, over a dozen internal revolts had occurred across their fringe colonies. The coffin signal was banned, possession punishable by dissection. But the message had already spread. Miners, engineers, border colonies, species long ignored by Jareth, elite began whispering the same phrase. We are not lost. It wasn't just human colonies waking up. It was an ideology, and the Jareth had no weapon for that. Earth finally responded with a diplomatic probe, unarmed, clean. It landed on the outskirts of the human colony with an offer of discussion. Peace. Support. Assistant Garen and his corps stood at the edge of the drop site, watching the sleek, untouched white drone unfold like a mechanical flower. It projected a holographic image. A Terran diplomat. Male. Suited. Smooth-voiced. We acknowledge our absence, our abandonment, and we extend full reparations. Our deepest regrets. Let us help rebuild. Garen didn't speak. He walked to the drone, pulled a jagged piece of metal from his belt. Then, with quiet precision, stabbed it into the projection unit. The hologram flickered, shorted. The drone's casing sparked and collapsed. Only then did Garen speak. Regret is soft, and soft is why we were forgotten. He turned to the others. We don't want peace. We want truth. We want them to bleed memory like we bled survival. Maran didn't flinch. Neither did the others. They didn't cheer. They just nodded. Back on Earth, the destroyed drone sent its final data back. The image that shook the Terran Defense Council was not the stabbing. It was the eyes of the man who did it. Flat. Cold. Not hostile. Just untrusting. Like he'd seen every kind of lie a civilization could offer, and stopped listening years ago. They called an emergency summit. And for the first time in Earth's new history, they asked the question no one wanted to say aloud. What happens when the abandoned don't want to come home? The answer came 1 week later. An Earthbound vessel, a private corp science ship, was ambushed in neutral space. Its coordinates had been leaked. On board were biorecords, original colonial data, and a full classified history of Earth's expansion failures. All of it was taken. The crew? Spared, left floating in a pod with oxygen and a single message burned into the side. Keep your lives. They were never the cost we wanted. Earth started to fracture. Some wanted to send an army, others wanted to welcome them. But more dangerous than both were the ones who began agreeing with the colony. Men who had been born too late to serve in the expansion. Men raised under silence and buried records. Men who now watched the footage of Garen's people and said, that should have been us. They began carving the same mark on walls across Earth's undercities, a black handprint, and beneath it, remember us or lose us. The Jareth tried one final strike, one last desperate move. Not an army, not a fleet. A bomb, cloaked, compressed, slid past the colony's orbit hidden in asteroid debris. It was meant to turn the entire valley into plasma. It never made it to the surface, because the Ascendants were waiting. They pulled the bomb from orbit with gravity anchors scavenged from Jareth wreckage, rerouted its path, and sent it into the sun. It detonated, a flare so large it reached the colony skies. But no one died. Not one. Only a new word was added to the wall that night. Try harder. In the deep systems, other colonies began speaking up. Some human, some hybrid. A once-thought-dead Martian mining sector blinked online. A prison ship once reported destroyed responded with a coded message. We still remember who you let burn. And then, worse for Earth than all of it, a rogue Earth fleet responded. 7 warships. No longer loyal to the Terran Union, they hailed Garen's colony directly. We remember what you became. Teach us how to do the same. Inside the main chamber of the colony, Garen stood over a large map of the galaxy. Markers lit up, each one a place that answered the message. Some human, others not. They weren't a faction, not a species, a belief. Marin lit a flame beneath the map, not to destroy it, but to swear to it. Earth fears will come back with hatred, he said. Garen nodded. But we're not coming back to be heard. We're coming to be felt. It started with a silence, no warning, no declaration, just every orbital satellite around Earth flickering offline at the same time. Military systems locked up. Civilian comms froze. Defense AI looped through outdated code like a seizure. For 43 seconds, Earth's sky went mute. Then a single word appeared on every screen, every monitor, every retina implant, every handheld across the planet. Remember. The first ship broke through the clouds at 0200 hours above the Pacific. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't Terran-made. It looked more like a weapon than a vessel. Parts torn from old Jareth dreadnoughts, welded with thick human alloys, scarred, blackened, built without elegance but with purpose. The news feeds called it the Ghost Crown. The military called it a threat. But the colony didn't speak. Not yet. It landed off the California coast, outside any city, in silence. A waiting move. A psychological move. Letting the world spin itself into panic without saying a single word. Admiral Ryan stood in the Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the satellite footage. His jaw locked. He didn't blink. "They're not cloaked," one officer muttered. "They want to be seen." "They want us to blink first," another said. Ryan didn't say anything. His eyes traced the ship's surface, markings not from any Terran database. Scars, names, tally marks carved into the hull, each one a memory, each one a grave. Inside the ship, Garen stood at the observation deck. He didn't speak either. Beside him were two children, both armored, both silent. Malric stepped forward from the shadows, now bearing a new symbol across his chest. Earth's broken flag, split down the middle with a black handprint stamped over it. "They're waiting for us to demand something," he said. Garen's face remained unreadable. "We don't demand." "Then what do we do?" Garen exhaled. "We show them what it cost." The ramp lowered on Earth's soil at dawn. No army walked out. No weapons were drawn. Just 7 humans. Garen led them. Barefoot, unarmed, wearing armor forged from suffering in years no one dared count. Each one stepped onto Earth like it was alien terrain. Not home. History. Earth's military watched from beyond the ridges. Snipers, drones, defense mechs primed. But no order was given to fire. Because something in their stride stopped logic cold. You don't shoot ghosts when they come home. You wait to see if they still remember how to bleed. At the Terran Senate, a special session was held. No cameras, no press, just Garen, standing before the same men and women who had signed the abandonment order decades ago. Their successors, their inheritors, their polished legacy. The president stood. "What is it you want?" Garen looked around the room. Calm. Quiet. "We don't want anything." Silence fell. He stepped forward slowly. "You left us. You forgot us. And now, the stars remember us better than our own blood does." The president tried again. "We acknowledge the loss. It was catastrophic. We couldn't maintain control of every colony." "You didn't lose control," Garen cut in. "You let go of the weak, the inconvenient, the ones who couldn't repay the cost." He tapped his chest. "We were the cost." Later that night, Garen stood at Earth's seawall, overlooking the ruins of old San Francisco. A city half underwater, left to rot after the rising waves. Malric joined him. "They'll try to offer tribute," Malric said. "Money, land, apologies." Garen didn't respond. "They don't understand what we've become," the boy continued. "We don't need food. We don't need fuel. We've got our own stars now." Garen nodded slowly. "I know." He looked to the skyline. empty and glittering under a world too busy pretending to be clean. But they need us to forgive them. And Garen's face hardened. We won't. The next day, a recording was sent across Earth, voluntarily. No threat, no encryption, just truth. Garen stood before a black wall, his hand resting on a piece of steel salvaged from a colony tunnel, a slab of Jareth metal carved with one word: forgotten. He stared into the camera. Earth thought we died, but we didn't. We lived in dark. We lived in cold. We buried our sons beside generators. We tore metal from ships that came to burn us and built homes from their bones. We taught our children to kill gods because men forgot how to believe in themselves. He paused. We didn't come here to hurt you. We came here to show you what you did. Across Earth, people watched in silence. In alleyways, rebels lit candles. In factories, workers played the audio on loop. In council buildings, leaders sat red-faced and trembling. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't war. It was worse. It was judgment. Then the colony sent one final act. A capsule. Launched from orbit, it didn't hit anything. It landed gently in the middle of the Terran Memorial Garden, where statues of lost colonies stood as hollow tributes. The capsule opened. Inside was a small box. Inside that box, a pair of boots, small, children's size, coated in dried blood and ash, and a single note. This is what you walked away from. The Terran government didn't respond. It couldn't. What do you say when the dead come back and speak better than the living? What do you offer a people who raised themselves in blood and metal and never forgot? In the colony's ship, as it lifted silently from Earth's atmosphere, Malric watched the cities fade beneath the clouds. Did they get the message? He asked. Garen didn't look down. They'll never forget it. Malric nodded. And what now? Garen turned. Now we teach the rest of the galaxy what it means to never be left again. The sky swallowed their ship, but Earth was never the same, because every child born after that day learned a new history, not of heroes, but of survivors. And every time someone looked into the stars, they remembered. There are humans out there who didn't need forgiveness, only memory, and they got it, the hard way.